The thing about working as a butler in different countries is you have to be able to really quickly adapt to new situations, because the different demands that are required between being a butler here in Barbados or in Scotland or the Maldives or the Middle East is different. But fundamentally, the important thing is they're the same.
So I arrived in Barbados yesterday and I opened my phone and I saw a notification for such a great question from one of my channel members. And obviously, my channel members are so important to me. I had to make a video to answer that question straight away. The question was, can I tell you about any of the strange requests that I've had as a butler over the years? Now, obviously, I'm going to have to be really careful that I don't let slip the names of any of the celebrities and clients that I was doing these things for. But other than that, as long as I'm careful, I think I can tell you a few stories.
So, the reason that I'm here in Barbados in the first place is to train the next generation of butlers. There's such an amazing history of great service here in Barbados. But a huge part of being a butler is making the impossible possible. It's doing those things that the guests only dream of and turning them into realities. So I thought, in that vein, I'm going to tell you a few stories of things that I've done in the past. Things as crazy as negotiating with the Sicilian mafia, transporting tomatoes on a private jet, and diving for sea urchins for someone's lunch. These might all sound like silly things that I've just made up, but they're genuinely all things that I've done in the past. I'll start with the tomatoes because it's the simplest and the shortest of stories. One of my clients wanted these very specific tomatoes. They were staying just outside London and they wanted these Italian tomatoes, and they said that none of the British tomatoes were of the correct quality. So they literally said that they wanted the private jet sent to Italy to pick up a case of tomatoes and bring them back to the UK. Now, the interesting thing about this crazy request is that actually it was very easy for me. I had to do very little in this circumstance, but it does highlight the kind of things that you have to do as a butler. Sometimes the requests of our guests can, of course, go past the line of what is morally right to do. And it's one of the really difficult things as a butler to make sure you stay on the correct side of not just the law, but also morality. I remember one client asking me to pose as someone else, asking me to do a job that would probably be more akin to what you'd think of a private detective doing. They were having a dispute with someone who'd restored a classic vehicle for them. They were saying that it wasn't done to the correct standard, and the restoration place was saying it was. And this had been rolling on for quite a while, and we needed the home address of the person that did the restoration. I don't want to go too much into detail about it for legal reasons. So, what I had to do was actually make up a character for myself. So, posing as this rich, fictitious car collector, I had to then arrange the delivery of an item to the restorer's home address. Once we had the home address, we could put proceedings in place to get him to do the work on the car that previously needed to be done. Now, actually, even though I felt quite uncomfortable in this role, and it was something that I think very much pushed the boundaries of what is right and proper for a butler to do, it did actually have quite a happy ending because a good agreement was made with the restorer who did the work again. And actually, my client of the time did pay the restorer some money to have it done. So it was a win for everyone. And all it was is one of these situations where two really sort of hard minded people had dug their heels in and refused to give way. And my little subterfuge, funnily enough, actually sorted it out. Sometimes, as I mentioned before, the whims of the guests can just be quite a laugh. I remember one time when traveling on a private yacht belonging to a client. We were just off the coast of Italy, and one of the guests on board suddenly decided that they wanted sea urchins. Now, they'd heard that they were an aphrodisiac and they were traveling with their beautiful supermodel girlfriend and wanted to try these for dinner. Now, we did what you usually do when on a super yacht. We phoned the chandler in the nearest port. Now, through various language barriers, we managed to get ourselves understood. But what we understood from him was that sea urchins were not on the menu and they couldn't deliver them to the boat. We had a meeting on board with the chef, some of the crew, and the captain to try and work out what we were going to do to meet this demand. And one of the crew, a very nice young South African lad, suddenly said, well, why don't we just dive for them? Because they live in the sea here. So why don't we just put on some snorkel gear and jump in? Now, this sounded like quite a lark and something that I'd wanted to be involved with. So I jumped on the speedboat with him and we went swimming. Now, my contribution to the quite large bag of sea urchins that we harvested, I'll be honest, was pretty small. The deckhand was a far, far better swimmer than me, and he definitely did the bulk of the work, but it was good fun. And more importantly, the guests who were watching all this transpire from the deck of the yacht were incredibly impressed with the levels that we'd gone to ensure that we'd met their demands. And at the end of the day, that is what being a butler is all about. There's some things which are possible and some which are not, but you must always the best of the situation. Always offer something and do something for the guests, for your client that is going to make them happy. Okay, so maybe you're wondering about my comment about dealing with the Sicilian mafia. It sounds far fetched. It sounds straight out of a fictitious novel. But, like reality always is, it's actually stranger than fiction. We just moored the super yacht in Sicily, and we'd arranged taxis to take us to the villa. We were met on the quayside by a handsome, well dressed Italian man in his mid to late 50s. I'll be honest with you, if you were to just conjure up the image in your mind of a mafioso, of a member of the mafia, you'd probably come up with something pretty similar to the way this guy looked. He had on a dark suit, white shirt, tie, swept black hair with dappled with grey. He introduced himself as being the tourist liaison for the area. Everyone jumped in the taxis and we headed off on the relatively short drive to the villa. The taxis all had meters, and I clocked that the meter was, I think, running at something like 30 or 40 euros, a very reasonable price. But when I went to pay, this liaison said that it was 500 euros per car. 500 euros. I said, that's a crazy price for such a short journey. But he was insistent. He went on to explain to me that he had previously been chief of police and that his primary role now as tourist liaison was to ensure the safety of all the tourists coming in to Sicily. And he said if we didn't pay for the service, it would be very difficult for him to guarantee the safety of my group. It's very important that butlers are very good at understanding implicit communication, but it certainly would not take much skill to understand the underlying thing that was implied by what he said. In other words, what he's saying is if we do not pay the 500 euros per car, he would guarantee the non-safety of my group. Now, this was a lot of money, and obviously I had to then go and explain to my client, to my boss, that he wanted this money. Now, the thing about billionaires is that they're surprisingly, how shall I say? I don't want to say tight, but tight. They are not easily parted with their money. There's a reason why they're billionaires. They're careful with it. And he did not want to pay this. He asked me to negotiate the price down. Now, as you can imagine, on my other hand, I have a member of the mafia who are also not great at negotiation. And I am in the middle. So I said, maybe we could pay less, maybe 200 euros per car, something like that. He was not impressed at my bargaining and said no. It was definitely 500. Then my boss asked me to speak directly to the taxi drivers and see if they would just take the money on the meter rather than me paying this gentleman. The taxi drivers told me with great confidence that I should definitely pay the gentleman the full money and refused to even discuss the possibility of paying less. I read the situation and went back to my client and said, we really do need to pay this money, or I think there's going to be some big issues. We did pay the money and we had a perfectly safe and lovely time in Sicily. I wouldn't really like to think what would have happened if we didn't. This was a good few years ago, so feel free to tell me, especially if there's any Sicilian citizens who are watching this. Maybe it's very different if you travel there now. I know that this is the kind of thing that can change a lot in a short period of time. Or maybe they're not any different, and you can tell me about other stories you may have. As I've mentioned in previous videos, the thing that really makes my job enjoyable is these tasks. I love to try and do the impossible. I love to try and problem solve. And it's a bit of a way of thinking. And if that's the way you think and you'd enjoy these situations, then you'd probably be a great butler. And if you just want to hear a bit more about things I get up to, please join me on my journey and subscribe to the channel. And I'll see you again soon. Bye bye.